So today we're going to do something a little different. While our podcast is about presidents, we love all history, so we felt it was appropriate to highlight one of the most important events in all of history, one made possible by an American president, that president being John F. Kennedy. July 20th, 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the very first manned landing on the moon. It was 1969, the year of Woodstock. Richard Nixon was in office as president. The Vietnam War was raging, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was the big hit at the box office. On July 16th, the crew of Apollo 11, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, known as Buzz, and Michael Collins lifted off in their massive Saturn V rocket from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. 4 days later, on July 20th, Armstrong and Aldrin separated in their spacecraft named Eagle from Michael Collins, who remained in the mothership Columbia. They then descended onto the lunar surface. The landing was quite harrowing, as their onboard computer overloaded, and they found themselves over a rocky patch of lunar surface. Armstrong had to take manual control of Eagle and landed with seconds left of fuel. Neil and Buzz became the first human beings to visit another world. A few hours later, with 600 million people watching back home, Armstrong took the momentous first steps on the moon and uttered those most famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." After a few hours on the lunar surface, they took off and rejoined Michael Collins in the command module. The three men then headed home, re-entered the atmosphere, and splashed down in the South Pacific on July 24th. This event is one of the most singular accomplishments in all of history, one of those that can truly be considered a civilizational milestone. It fulfilled the late President John F. Kennedy's vision to put a man on the moon by 1970 in response to Soviet achievements in space. When Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins splashed down in the Pacific, the first person they saw after their historic trip was 20-year-old John Wolfram, a Navy SEAL and Frogman who was part of the recovery team and had been training to assure that the crew returned safely. Today, he's our guest for this episode of This American President. It's an honor to have him on our podcast. He has a distinguished record serving our country in Vietnam, earning a Purple Heart, and he had a front row seat to history. Thank you for being on our podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Now, before we get into Apollo 11, if you could just tell us, where you're from and how you ended up becoming a Navy SEAL.
I'm from Wisconsin, a small town called Fort Atkinson. I remember in junior high school watching a program on television about the Navy Frogmen. And 1967, when I graduated, if you didn't go to college, you had a good chance of being drafted. And I didn't want to be drafted, and I didn't want to go to school at that time. So I went to a Navy recruiter and signed up for the Navy. Went to boot camp out in San Diego. And in boot camp, I took a screen test to start Class 44 of BUDS training. And I made it through that and joined the Underwater Demolition Team 11.
Now, I heard or I saw on your website that I think you were trained in Coronado. Is that right?
That is right. Coronado up by San Diego.
Oh, great.
Southern California.
I
Naval
went to
Amphib Base.
Okay. I went to college in UC San Diego, so I have a lot of great memories of Coronado.
Sure.
Now, what does it exactly mean to be a frogman?
I think the terminology began during the World War II. They used certain men with wetsuits on to clear beaches during landing sites. The enemies put out obstacles that kept the smaller boats from getting close to shore. And so they would send in a Navy frogmen to dive down and blow up those obstacles so the boats could get in closer to shore. And I'm not sure who termed the phrase frogmen, but we know one thing, they're not green.
Right. Now, it says that I think you were 29 graduates out of original applicant pool of about 200 people. So it's a pretty rigorous, taxing program, obviously.
Well, they told us back then that about 2,000 people would take a screen test for an individual class during that time period. My class started with 79, and 29 of us graduated.
Oh, wow. Now, how were you chosen specifically to participate in the space recovery missions?
Well, I was serving my first tour in Vietnam, Christmas Eve, 1968. I was out on a barge listening to my Sanyo radio, the Armed Forces Station, listening to Christmas carols, and the broadcast was interrupted by the Apollo 8 crew, William Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman, and they were reading from Genesis chapter 1, I believe, the story of creation, as they were circling the moon. At that point in my life, I had no idea that I would be involved in a recovery, but shortly after that, we returned back to the United States, Coronado, and our team was called upon to be the next team that would rescue Apollo 10 and 11. And they asked for volunteers, and there were several of us that volunteered. We had to have 3 complete rescue teams. Apollo 10, there were 3 on each team, and then Apollo 11, there were 4 men on each team because we had that decontamination swimmer. Apollo 10, I was a backup, and then they asked me to be a part of Apollo 11 as a primary crew because I was a fast swimmer. We had races. Swimming in the ocean with fins is a little bit different than swimming, in a swimming pool without fins. I had strong leg kick, and they needed somebody to catch that capsule and put that sea anchor on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So Apollo 8, so that happens in December of 1968. And so you participated specifically in Apollo 10 and 11. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, those happened very quickly, very rapid succession within a few months. So it sounds like you guys really had to kind of pick up things, had a steep learning curve in order to train for these missions.
That's true. They sent out a boilerplate that looked like a capsule to San Diego, and we had to team up with the helicopter crews, and we practiced a couple months, I believe, for Apollo 10 to get ourselves, adapted to what NASA required and see if we could do it under a certain time. Right. And then, of course, the primary crew that went into Apollo 11 had been on Apollo 10, so we had an advantage for Apollo 11. We've already been trained somewhat to put the collar on and so forth.
So you get asked to be part of the recovery effort. Apollo 8 was very historic, and I think oftentimes people forget that every mission had built upon the previous mission. If the previous mission fails, then it kind of changes the whole plan for the future mission. And Apollo 11 was part of this long chain. And so, Apollo 8 was very historic. Apollo 10 was also very historic. And so when the opportunity came for you to participate that and just knowing how historically significant that was, what was your feeling at that moment?
Well, it was quite an awesome feeling to know that you're going to be a part of some great historical time in history. I remember when I was much younger, when they started off with those Mercury launches, and then came the Gemini. And so when the Apollo came, we've already had a lot of news articles and TV reports about what was going on. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of grew up with that. I never thought I'd be a frogman at that time. I never thought I'd be a part of that. So here I am 2 years removed from high school. I'm 20 years old. And they asked me to be a part of the primary crew that's going to rescue Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Mike Collins if everything goes right.
Right.
There's actually 3 teams that could rescue the space capsule for safety reasons. When you take off early in the morning for one of those recoveries, we head off in different directions, different coordinates, just in case that capsule might land somewhere else than supposed. And the safety of the astronauts are always the most important on everybody's mind.
Right. Now, so I was watching in the video that was on your website. There are multiple videos, and it's a great website, and it's www.johnwolfram.com. And it talked about kind of the dangers of the recovery missions, and it mentioned that they're big swells. The the seas are quite choppy, that they're shark infested. Could you talk about those dangers during those missions?
Well, I guess the greatest danger on Apollo 11 was the change of weather. The night before the recovery, where the NASA wanted the spacecraft to land, originally there were thunderstorms, so they asked the Hornet to relocate 250 miles from where they were, which meant the Hornet had to speed all night long trying to get on location. Because of the storms in the area, the swells would be much larger than we anticipated. And so we were going to be jumping into water that we've never trained in, with swells up to 10, 12 feet. And so it made our job a lot more difficult. There were pesky sharks, especially in the night operations. The helicopter lights would shine down on the ocean and attract the sharks. And then other things would attract the sharks in the water if you're in there long enough, and if you're near them, they'll appear. We've had several occasions where we had to get out of the water in order not to, be bitten.
Oh, wow. I think the last thing anyone would want after the first men to walk on the moon is to come home and get bitten by a shark or something like that, or have their capsule capsize or something in the ocean after getting back.
On one of the training things that we did, a shark bit into the foam around that Billy Pugh net, and it left a little hole there.
Oh, wow.
You can see his teeth marks.
So the threat was quite real. Maybe it could be the premise for a new Sharknado movie or Jaws movie or something.
My job was, the first man out of the helicopter being the sea anchor man. And so when I landed in the water, I was always in the water by myself. And the first thing I would do is take a quick look around me to make sure that they weren't nearby.
Right. Now, was there a big difference in training for Apollo 10 versus Apollo 11? Apollo 11 is obviously the big one, the landing.
Well, on Apollo 11, NASA required this back contamination procedure, which was not done on Apollo 10. They were afraid of lunar pathogens.
Moon germs.
The capsule comes burning back, 25,000 miles per hour. And I'm sure that the outside of the capsule, any germ that wouldn't have lasted too long with that kind of heat, over 5,000 some degrees. But inside the capsule, of course, they had the moon samples. And so they wanted to be very careful because nobody really knew at the time. And so that required us to jump in the water with a scuba tank on, and that was a 50-pound scuba tank. And then my sea anchor bag with that little parachute in there was about 7 or 8 pounds. And you're jumping into the water with that weight on, and then I had to swim up to the capsule, which is moving in a current, and it's bobbing up and down. So it was quite a challenge, and that's why they needed, all of us had to be strong swimmers, but they wanted the fastest one to jump in first to catch the capsule in case it was in a strong current.
Oh, wow. And your website said that the capsule, after re-entering the atmosphere, it splashed down with about 10 seconds. It was 10 seconds behind the flight plan and about a mile off its target point, which to me sounds incredibly precise. So it's just amazing that they're able to do that.
Especially after they changed location, just, 20 some hours before that.
Right. Now, I think I recall on one of the videos saying that you almost lost your chance to be the team that was there, and you had mentioned all the different backup teams.
Well, what happened, as I mentioned, when you take off early in the morning, there's 3 different rescue teams, Frogman and helicopter crews, and we spread out in different quadrants. And then you just, pray that capsule falls near you so you can be the one that would get in the water. Any one of the teams was qualified to do their job. And the safety of the astronauts is utmost important than some one team getting there and doing it. Unfortunately, our helicopter was still about 15 miles away when the capsule hit the ocean. Buzz Aldrin, I believe it was supposed to flip a lever. When the capsule hit the ocean, the jets in those parachutes, but his hand was knocked off the lever, and the wind and the parachutes turned the capsule upside down. So there was one crew right on site, and they were hovering over the capsule, thinking that they would be the ones that would get in the water. But it took a few minutes for that capsule to upright. They had switches inside that would inflate these three big balloons, and the capsule was slowly upright. And as it was uprighting, our helicopter was going as fast as it could to get on site. The pilots wanted to be the ones that rescued it, and of course we did. And since we were chosen to be the primary crew, we wanted also to be in the water, and we got there just in time. The capsule uprighted. Someone gave a command for that other helicopter to move out of the way, and our helicopter hovered above, and I'm standing in the door ready to jump in.
Yeah, and when you watch the video, it looks quite violent. I mean, there's the waves are hitting and everything. It's you can kind of get seasick if you watch the waves too much.
Yeah, I read where the astronauts took seasick pills on the way back. Early in the morning, the seas were quite boisterous. As time went by, they did subside and get much more smooth. But as the time I jumped in the water, I think you can see on that video that when I grab a hold of that capsule handle, it just takes me right out of the water and knocks me back down. If that thing would have hit me on the head, I'd probably have knocked me out.
Oh, yeah.
I was strong, 20-year-old Navy frogman who had just gone through a lot of training, and I was ready to go.
And you were the first person that they saw, the first human being back on Earth after landing on the moon.
That's a little humbling, yeah. For the astronauts, they have to look at my face, the first one they see. I swam up to the capsule, of course, and I had to attach that sea anchor right underneath the hatch door. There was a place for me to attach it there with an O-ring. And right at that time, I was supposed to look in the hatch window to get a thumbs up from the astronauts to see if they were okay. There was several helicopters up above. One of them had a NASA doctor, and I relayed to that helicopter that the astronauts were okay, and then I proceeded to attach that sea anchor, which was a parachute about 12 feet in diameter, and it opens up underneath the capsule, and it causes a drag, and it stabilizes the capsule so much so we can put a collar around it.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you remember specifically looking in and seeing the three of them in there.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
They were happy people.
I'm sure
they were glad to be back. I think Nixon later on asked Armstrong when he was on board ship, when they were in a mobile quarantine facility, he said something about, I think, this was one of the hardest parts of the journey. And Armstrong said, yes, it was. And I think what he meant was it's out of their hands. They're, dependent upon somebody else to be there to help and assist them out. And so, when you have to depend on anybody, you just hope that they know how to do their job well.
Right. Now, I have to mention something I think that is part of your story is the whole thing with the flowers, the decals, and all that. So if you could talk about that.
Well, anybody that remembers the 1960s might not have a problem with that. It was something that was vogue during that time period. If you look back at any pictures of these minivans that were decorated up, or the musical groups that were popular, or the fads of the day, there's just a lot of flowers. And it kind of represented peace. There was a lot of peace signs going on then. Remember, there was a controversy of war going on at the same time. And the Apollo 11 happened right in the middle of all of that. It was kind of a reprieve from things that the American public had to watch on television. It was a little bit more exciting than sending your boys to war. And so We brought some flowers on Apollo 10, those little decals, you put on your shower and bathtub and things like that. Posted one on a hatch window of Apollo 10. NASA was uptight about that. So on Apollo 11, during our training and briefings, they told us, no messing around on this one. And so we had these flower decals. We're thinking about, putting underneath the helicopter or doing something. We decided that wouldn't work. They already had some decals under there. So I just plastered them all over my wetsuit.
And they're immortalized. You look at the photos, the videos, and there are flowers on your wetsuit as you're rescuing Apollo 11.
I always tell my friends, because our picture's been in several different encyclopedias and magazines and whatever. And even out at these museums, sometimes they have pictures of Frogman rescuing a capsule, and they say it's Apollo 11, and it's probably not. And I always say, if you don't see the flowers, it's not me.
Right. Yeah. Now, a lot of precautions taken as far as the potential moon pathogens. I was watching the videos. It says that there were isolation garments. There were chemicals that were sprayed onto the astronauts. Did you have any fear of those moon germs, the potential of, your own kind of health being affected by that?
Well, you have to remember, I was 20 years old, and 20-year-old kids really don't think about things like that too much, But, we were a little bit concerned. We had to be on that open scuba. If we would have went off our breathing, NASA had people up in a helicopter watching all of us. If we would have broken protocol, they had a mobile quarantine facility on the ship that some of us would have landed in. We didn't want to go on there for 21 days. But the procedure was that once we put that collar around the capsule, the three of us, 2 rafts were dropped into the ocean. They were both inflated. One was attached right underneath the hatch door where the astronauts would come out. And then the other one was upwind 25 yards on a line. And then the helicopter came back, and the 4th frogman jumped in without a wetsuit, swam up to us and got in our raft, and then a helicopter came back and dropped down the Billy Punette that had a bag, and in that bag was 4 of these biological isolation garments and a canister with the decontaminant. And he would put on one of those big suits for short, and then we would pull on that rope and get him close to the capsule where he could get into that first raft that was attached underneath the hatch door. And then he proceeded to wash down the capsule, all the equipment there, the raft with that decontaminant. And then the hatch door was open. I think the astronauts might have opened it from the inside. And they were handed those 3 biological isolation garments. And if you've ever looked inside that capsule, or one of those capsules, the size, they're in there pretty tight. They had to take off their spacesuits, and they had to put on these 3 biological isolation garments in that tight, space that they had there. And they figured out how to do it, I guess. And one would stand and 2 would kind of crouch back and let one dress, and then the other one would. And when they had those out, they would come out into the raft, and then they were also washed down, scrubbed down. And that's when we came in close, all of us frogmen. The photo pool above on the Hornet gave us cameras. We had 5 underwater Nikonis cameras. And the fella in front of me, Mike Mallory, he had 4 of them, and I had 1. The other frogman was in the water. He would try to catch that Billy Punette and hand it up to Clancy Heidelberg, the other frogman, and hand it to one of the astronauts where they could get in it one at a time, and then they were hoisted aboard the helicopter.
Yeah.
Once they were all in the helicopter, they flew back to the USS Hornet, and they're in the helicopter. The helicopter goes down this elevator down to the bay where the mobile quarantine facility is. They come out of the helicopter, and they walk over to the mobile quarantine facility, and there's a doctor that goes in there with them. And then you'll see President Nixon show up, Kissinger, and a lot of other, dignitaries and former astronauts are there to greet the astronauts.
I think Frank Borman was there, the Apollo 8 commander.
Yeah, Frank was there. You can see him chiding the astronauts about something there.
Right, right. Now, what was the extent of your interaction with the astronauts? Obviously, as soon as you open the hatch, there they are. What did you get to talk to them much, or or when you guys were back on ship?
In the water, we had to be on that scuba gear, so we couldn't talk. We could show expressions in our eyes or whatever and do hand signals. The astronauts had on those biological isolation garments, and whatever they said would come out like mumbling or something. But you could see their faces. They were smiling. They were happy. I'm sure they were glad to be back alive. Mission success. They're in a raft. So basically, just hand signals,
Right. No, so I'm sure you obviously watched the Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon 4 days earlier. So it must have been an incredible thing to be thinking that in 4 days you would be with these people, the people that you're watching on TV, half a quarter of a million miles away.
Well, on the ship, we had no media in those days.
Oh, okay.
We had shortwave radio. And then every once in a while, some helicopter would fly in papers from Honolulu or something a day or two, late, and we would read some news there. And then they would give us updates. NASA had communication somehow, and we had daily briefings. Every time we did one of those SIMEXs, we were in a room with NASA officials and the ship crew that were involved, and we'd all debrief, and they would give us updates, that way. So we missed it. We saw it later, of course, when we got back to the United States.
I see. And you got some souvenirs from the capsule, I understand.
When we were out in the ocean, after the helicopter picked up the astronauts and took them to the USS Hornet, we're out in the middle of the ocean waiting for the ship to come aside. The ship had to come to us. We were dead in the water. And we took advantage of our quiet time out there to strip off some of that foil, that gold-plated foil that NASA puts on all their spacecraft for communication purposes and reflectance. I think it's called Captain Kapton, the man who invented it. They still use it today. When it burned through the atmosphere, one whole side was charred off. And if you see any of the pictures of that capsule in the water, you can see some of that foil that's glowing. It's gold looking. We stripped some off and put it on our wetsuits for souvenirs.
Wow. So I guess...
Well, we knew once that the capsule got aboard the ship, there'd be no way we would get near the capsule. And sure enough, they had Marines guarding it. I've seen that capsule out in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and there's no foil on it whatsoever. NASA got all theirs when it got back to Houston.
I see. So you have a trophy from all your work that you did.
Yeah, I actually sell little pieces to fund my work in mission work in Vietnam.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a good lead-in. So I know that you had served in Vietnam. I believe it was twice, right?
Yes.
And then afterwards you have become a reverend and a missionary?
Yeah. After Apollo 11, Mayor Daley flew us to Chicago. Wyndon Dynus gave us the key to the city. There was a parade in our behalf, and we did various things. We did demonstrations at their water festival out in Lake Michigan and so forth. But after that, there was some dead time waiting to go back to Vietnam. I was rooming with some guys that were much older than me, Frogman, SEAL team guys. And they were really into the drugs of the day, and they turned me on to this LSD, mescaline, pot, hashish, some opiates and different things. And I didn't think I'd ever, be addicted to this stuff, but I took it pretty hard there for a while. Several months just really wiped me out. And when I landed back in Vietnam, I was really into these drugs. We took some with us, and you could buy them anywhere in Vietnam. I remember the first night in Vietnam, they put us up in a a hotel called Victoria. I dropped some LSD, and I remember walking across that room. I pulled back the sliding glass doors, and I was out on this balcony. The sun was setting, and I could see that war was still going on. You could see puffs of smoke. You could see tracer bullets off in the distance. Down the street below was a military vehicle, and somebody was on a bullhorn crying out for all the GIs to get inside the buildings, the curfew. But now this LSD trip that I took was turning into a real bad trip, and the walls begin to melt, and the cockroaches turn into monsters, and the dripping of that faucet, sound like hammer blows in the bathroom, and these hideous voices begin to scream at me and condemn me, and I saw faces of 3 high school friends who had just been killed in that war. Close friends of mine who come from a real small town, about 8 or 9,000 or less, when the Vietnam War was going on. And these voices said, "You're going to die over here. Why don't you just end your life?" So my mind wasn't under my control. It was in control of these drugs, and walked over to the bed, pulled out a 9mm pistol, and I had it in my hand, and I had it pointed up my head. That's when I heard a little voice I heard once when I was about 7 years old, right out of Sunday school. And just said, "John, I'm here and I love you, and I got a plan for your life." And that's all I heard, but I put the gun down and I cried out to the Lord. And from that point on, I wasn't saved then, but I was drinking, taking drugs, living a very immoral life all through Vietnam. But, when the average fighting age of the soldier in Vietnam was 19 and a half, young kids right out of high school. They went through some real quick training, and then they went over to Vietnam for on-the-job training. And, when you're young, you want to see your friends again and your moms and dads, and you start thinking about the hereafter, because every day is like Russian roulette. You don't know if it's going to be your day to die or not. So there's a lot of these young kids, when the chaplain would come in, they would go hear what the preacher had to say. But that was just the beginning. I was wounded. A couple weeks later, down where we were serving time, deep down in the Mekong Delta, our boat was hit with 8 rockets, and I was wounded. Our boat had to be towed in, and fortunately, that took me out of this real dangerous place that I was in, and I went from one hospital to the other. Ended up in Cam Ranh Bay Army Recuperation Hospital. I began to look at the calendar, and I realized, that my teammates would be rotating out of Vietnam, going back to the Philippines and then back to Coronado, and I wanted to rotate out with them. So I went to the doctors, and they gave me orders after, I was persistent and wanted to meet up with my friends. They gave me dressings and bandages and sent me on my way. And I remember my first ride out was with a civilian couple pilots in a Piper plane that were doing business over there. We were taking off and getting altitude, and we almost got knocked out of the sky by some jets. And I'm thinking, there's so many ways to die over here, And when I finally made it back to Saigon and went back to the Victoria Hotel, which became our hangout when we were in R&R, and I ran into some SEAL team guys there from Da Nang, and they were happy to see me, but I could see that something was wrong. And they said, "You haven't heard." And I said, "Heard what?" And they said, "Well, while you were recovering, we lost 5 more of our teammates." And I said, "No, who?" And when they began to name them off, all 5 of them were stationed at the same place I was, down in the Mekong Delta on the same float. 3 of them had gone through my same training class. And I'm just thinking, man, why me? Why? I've got 8 friends that died now. Why did 58,000 American boys and ladies die in that war? Why did some of us make it home alive? And I really don't have the answer to that. But I do believe this, that when God looked down in that hotel room, he saw a little smoke down there, deep down. Not much, just a little. And that's all God needs to see in a human being. And I believe all the angels in heaven will fan that little desire to get it burning. And that's what I believe God was doing. He was just keep working on me, working on me.
Mm-hmm.
When I got back to the United States, I didn't run to the first church and get saved either. It took another year.
Mm-hmm.
But God never left my side. And I saw an article one day that led me to a little Pentecostal church down in Imperial Beach, California, and it changed my life. And I took the GI Bill and went to Bible school and ended up doing evangelistic work, pastored the church. And then from 1983 until today, I've been doing foreign mission work, many places in the South Pacific and Asia, including Vietnam.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing all that. I think that it really kind of highlights all the different directions that and experiences the country had from that time. And people talk about how the 60s were such a tumultuous time, 60s and 70s, with the Vietnam War and a lot of internal conflict. And then suddenly there's this incredible event, the landing on the moon. And it must have been such an incredible time to be alive, because it seemed like people were losing faith in the country. And then suddenly the country does this incredible thing where they achieve this, they land on the moon. But even after that, there were still a lot of social issues, and you talk about drug use, and obviously a lot has been written about that. But that all that kind of led you to where you are today, so it's an incredible story.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that would like to say they have a Purple Heart and all of that, but I don't think anybody wants to go to battle and be wounded and spend those many weeks in a hospital recovering. But, that was a strange era. Guys begin to grow their hair long, in the early 60s, and girls wore flowers in their hair. And we were invaded by those singing groups with those weird animal names like the Beatles and the Birds and the Monkeys and the Turtles and the Animals. And there was racial tension in the South. They killed John F. Kennedy. They killed Martin Luther King. They killed Robert F. Kennedy. You got Charles Manson and his gang. You got, Woodstock. You got Kent State, where the National Guard shot into a bunch of students, and Allison Krauss and two of her classmates are laying dead on the sidewalk. 9 are wounded. 127 times the National Guard was called to colleges in 1969 alone to stop the rioting. They're blowing up government buildings. It was just a real chaotic age,
Right.
And when you're young, you just sometimes get caught up in all of that, and I did.
Right. Now, you wrote a book in 2012, so I just want to plug it real fast. It's called Splashdown: The Rescue of a Navy Frogman. You also have that website I mentioned earlier, www.johnwolfram.com, WOLFRAM, Wolfram. Have you met any of the astronauts since then, outside of your duties when you were doing the recovery?
No, I have not. I did send a couple of pictures about a year or two after the fact to Neil Armstrong. I sent them to all three, and Neil Armstrong sent one back and said, "To John, who shared in our great adventure," and he signed it. Buzz Aldrin just said, "To John," best wishes, I believe, John. And Michael Collins, I never got one back from him.
Okay. Yeah.
But through my book, I've had a couple of different space shuttle astronauts contact me, order my book.
Oh, okay.
And, there's kind of a knit community out there. I believe people that are interested seem to find these things.
Right.
I was just out at the USS Hornet about 3 weeks ago at the museum, Alameda. And
wow.
they're having all kinds of events leading up to their part in the recovery.
Sure.
And I was out at Langley about 2 months ago. They interviewed me out there. The Wall Street Journal's interviewed me. They're going to do an article. New York Times called and interviewed me. CNN's lined up to do it.
Okay.
Georgia Public TV came out to a service that I spoke at and videoed it, and they interviewed me. They're supposed to be doing a life story on me. The Georgia magazine that goes to every house in Georgia put an article in there, a hometown hero.
Okay.
This is the 50th anniversary. I guess you got one more shot here.
Right. Well, there was a great documentary I saw a couple of months ago, Apollo 11. That's what it's called. It's a CNN Films documentary. It's excellent. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really incredible.
Yeah, it's the actual footage. If you ever see it again, there's this one small part there in that recovery. I think you might even see me jumping out. But when they take that collar and it goes aboard the USS Hornet, just there for a couple of seconds, if you look real close on that orange collar, you can see my name written on it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be sure to check it out. To know that this proof positive, this is authentic.
We were having a lot of fun back in those days.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and it's been just a real honor and pleasure to speak with you. Not only because you participated in this incredible historic milestone, but also because of your service to our country and just all the experiences that you have to share. So we thank you so much for your time, and hope you enjoy the 50th anniversary of this great historic event.
I am. Thank you much for having me.
Thank you. This American President is produced by myself, Richard Lim, and Michael Neal. Thanks to my dad, Bert Chu. The music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. You too can support us by going to patreon.com/thisamericanpresident and giving any amount you choose per episode that we release. If you like what you've been hearing, you can also help us by sharing an episode on Twitter or Facebook. I'm Richard Lim. We're back next time with more This American President.